Waiting for this to show live. I know we're live now, but I want to make sure everybody it's communicating all the systems properly before I get into what we're doing today. Okay, it's now live on YouTube. That usually means everything else is working. Let's just make sure. How's everybody doing today? Good, I hope. Yes, I am live, Tony. I'm here live. We do have some pre-recorded interviews, though. So today is Friday, November 10th. That means it's time for some right-wing insanity report here on Status Coup. I'm Tina-Desiree Berg. And this week, I am going to be doing part one of what is going to be a two-part special report on two cases that are currently winding their way through the court system in San Diego. Now, both cases evolve around the proceedings that happened on January 9th in Pacific Beach, California. This was 3 days after the Capitol insurrection. January 6th was the Capitol insurrection. So 3 days after, this was a Trump Stop the Steal rally and counter protests. Many of you are aware of this case because I've reported on it, not only for Status Coup, but also for Daily Dot. But we have some things that have now moved forward on this that I want to discuss because it has to do with right-wing extremism. So I interviewed the attorneys from both cases. I'm going to be playing two interviews today, one with attorney Curtis Briggs, who is the defense attorney for Jeremy White, who is one of the quote-unquote Antifa defendants, and then also Bryan Pease, who is bringing litigation against the city of San Diego for bias in policing. So the first one is going to be the Curtis Briggs interview. The reason we're talking to him and why there's been some forward movement on this case is Curtis has now filed a motion to disqualify District Attorney Stephan based on her ties to right-wing extremists. So that basically focuses on two things. The fact that she has failed to bring charges against any of the right-wing extremists or Trump supporters that also engaged in violence that day. This is not up for debate. We have plenty of video evidence showcasing that that is true. And then the second part is the fact that she has taken campaign donations from some of these individuals who are verified members of the American Guard, which is a neo-Nazi, hard white supremacist, as the ADL describes them, organization. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start with the Curtis Briggs and Jeremy White is joining with him. He's one of the defendants. We're going to talk through this whole case. I am going to be here in the chat, even though this is a pre-recorded interview. So if you have questions or thoughts, I will be here reading the chat. And as always, we appreciate your super chats. If you have questions, it costs money for us to put these pieces together. I've spent hours, and I do mean hours, combing through not only body cam footage, but video footage from both sides of the protest that day, as well as court documents. But this case should be looked at more deeply because even though San Diego is maybe considered a smaller beach community, I think that this particular case does have political repercussions for what happens in the rest of the country as far as looking at Antifa as some sort of organized, kind of gang, as she wants to make it seem as, versus a non-collective open movement. So let's start with the Curtis Briggs and Jeremy White interview. Speaking with one of the Pacific Beach defendants, Jeremy White, that is being charged with multiple felonies as being a member of Antifa and conspiracy to commit related to the things that happened at that Pacific Beach rally that day. And then also his attorney, Curtis Briggs, who has now filed a motion to disqualify the DA Stephan based on her connections to white supremacists. It includes money that she was given by individuals that are in groups like American Guard and the Proud Boys, and also the fact that she has failed to prosecute many of these individuals for previous assaults and other crimes that they've committed throughout San Diego. And many of them are now listed in this case as being both witnesses and defendants. So welcome. Thanks for speaking with me today, Curtis and Jeremy.
It's great to be here. Thanks for your interest in when something like this is happening. It's you and the press that can change it. The attorneys are almost powerless against this type of systemic corruption.
Indeed, because she's pretty much been controlling what gets out there. It is not surprising to folks that pay attention to grand juries that often grand juries are only as good as the prosecutors that are running them. If they choose to hide evidence, they can do so. If they choose to paint a story a certain way, they can do so. It's not the same thing as entering a court where you have a defense attorney putting those notions or those claims on trial. So you will get different outcomes depending on who's doing them. I think in this particular case, her grand jury testimony was very much one-sided. Full disclosure, she did use some of my video in her grand jury case. She never reached out to talk to me. I contacted her and several DDAs multiple times. They didn't respond, minus one incident where I was asking about some sealed documents that were leaked. But, you know, what she said about our footage wasn't entirely accurate. And she told the grand jury basically that we had deleted some videos and edited them and re-uploaded them. And that is an absolute lie. That never happened. If she had spoken to me, she would know that. She could also check the metadata on the videos. You'll see that they were never deleted. So anyway, this is just a pattern of who she is. And I did want to disclose that right at the top of the conversation. So getting into the case, before we do that, I do want to give Jeremy an opportunity to sort of introduce himself to the world. You've had a lot of stuff being thrown at you, said about you. Who's the real Jeremy?
Yeah, hi. I'm a community organizer and activist from Los Angeles. I have been for some time. Tina, I've seen you in many different aspects of that organizing over the years. A lot of it has been, you know, with the Democratic Party and other, you know, politically affiliated organizations. I worked in the Bernie Sanders campaign both times as a grassroots volunteer, helping get the numbers out.
Indeed. In fact, full disclosure, the first time I met you, Jeremy, was at the Iowa caucus years ago.
Yes. Yeah, I was canvassing in Iowa right before COVID and got to finally meet Tina in person. But we've been kind of in the same spheres for a long time. But yeah, I'm just an artist, filmmaker, organizer, and what I have witnessed in this country coming to fruition is heightened fascism, heightened white supremacy, attacks by these groups against people of color, queer community. And it's been very alarming. I've had a very close angle on this thing over the years, you know, starting in late 2015 and watched as the right-wing extremists have just become emboldened and empowered through, you know, rhetoric and all that.
Indeed. Yeah. So let's get into some part of the cases. I want to talk about Summer Stephan for a moment, because when she chose to bring this case to light, she put out a press release in which she claimed that the events of that day were not, you know, fights between two groups, that they were not, to use her words, was not a mutual fray, but that it was exclusively Antifa that was responsible for the violence, and that, you know, they were conspiring to go down to San Diego and, you know, do these acts of violence against Trump supporters and patriots. That, you know, I attended several of the court hearings at the beginning. She tried to make the case that all of the defendants should have their Fourth Amendment rights removed because they were, you know, part of a conspiracy, and that they dox, you know, Trump people, and they might put people in danger that way. Like a whole host of things. Twisted Tea was one of the things. You guys picked up a case of Twisted Tea on your way down to San Diego. That's a weapon. So, I mean, all kinds of kind of extremist things. Like, I think most people listen to this and go like, what? And then you turn to the video and you see that there are multiple videos that show Trump folks assaulting people. Yeah. So how did that feel initially when this came out?
It was shocking to say the least. My first awareness of it was having my home raided at 4:30 in the morning, 9 months after the action. And several hours before I'd even gotten any information on why I was being arrested, why I was being taken down to San Diego. It was even more shocking finding out that was the case, because I was a medic at that action. I showed up as a street medic. I showed up and treated several people that were injured during scuffles on both sides of the aisle. I treated a woman who was with the right-wingers who had been maced, and I helped her with the saline and flushing her eyes out. So, you know, leading up to this, 3 days before this was the insurrection at the Capitol. And we'd all been watching this very closely. And here in Los Angeles, downtown LA, there was a group of these right-wing extremists that had gathered They had assaulted several people, including Berlinda, was it Nemo? What was her last name?
Berlinda Nebo. Yeah, yes, I filmed that. And in fact, let me interrupt you there. I do want to mention that one of the, two of the individuals, actually, one I've never been able to identify, but two of the individuals that participated in that attack on Berlinda Nebo were at that Pacific Beach protest. In particular, Mercedes Diaz, who you will see holding up her weave into the air. She holds up in the air and she basically says this is the first scalping of the new civil war. She was present that day in Pacific Beach.
Yeah. There were several people, I don't personally know the San Diego extremists as well as the LA ones, but there were several people there that I didn't recognize that day on the 6th that looked familiar from January 9th that very well could have been there. And it was, January 6th in LA was shocking for us because while we were watching the violence, I mean, they killed a police officer in the Capitol. The rhetoric was, going to harm or unalive senators and Congress people. It was extreme, to say the least. While we were watching that, the LA right wingers were just getting fueled by it. Their rhetoric was, it's our turn next. And we watched for 3 days as that turned into action. They planned this Pacific Beach action where they were using the same language as the insurrectionists. I believe that a couple people from the insurrection were at the Pacific Beach action.
Yes, at least 7 that I'm aware of.
Wow. So not just a couple.
No.
One of the things that on January 6th that we saw that very much tied into our experience with Pacific Beach was the police reaction to the right wingers. In downtown Los Angeles, the commander of that action that day was Captain Rick Stabile. I'm sure you've heard of this gentleman.
I've had conversations with him, yes.
He was exposed as being all over right-wing Twitter, voicing support for the insurrection and the insurrectionists. And
correct.
That day, on January 6th at downtown, he was at the very least turning a blind eye, and at the very worst, promoting violence and letting the right wingers get into our area and start violence.
That's right.
So,
interesting. Let me stop you there and mention something, because obviously I was there that day filming. John Farina, who is my coworker, was in the Capitol building on January 6th, his now famous footage where you see in the hallway where they were, among other things, smushing that officer's head in the door, assaulting the other one, pulling him out down the stairs and hitting him with flags and whatnot. A lot of those individuals, by the way, are from Los Angeles. I want to mention that day in downtown LA, there were multiple officers that weren't okay with Rick Stabile's choices that came up to me and said, I actually would be thankful if you could tell me who I should be paying attention to over here. There's a lot of violence breaking out. It's obviously not all being done by the leftists. So, wildly, no group is monolithic. We tend to think of organizations like the military or police as being monolithic. And the reason is they have to obey command, right? So whoever's the top dog, he gives out the orders and everybody just falls in line, even if that might be against their better wisdom, better thoughts, whatnot. And you see a lot of that when it comes to regards to this. Also that day in Pacific Beach, the body cam's really telling in the sense that command that day did get pushed back from several of the beat cops that were, saying this protest has been hijacked by Proud Boys, whatnot.
Yeah. It was very much similar to our experience with Captain Stabile in Los Angeles on several occasions. There was one time we had just planned a simple march from Grand Station to City Hall. It wasn't a direct action. It was just a march. And they showed up with multiple SUVs pulled right on the lawn and tried dispersing and arresting us right away. And
cool.
it was, he had it in for us, definitely. And it was very similar to what we witnessed in Pacific Beach as well. The police boldly had their backs turned to these violent fascist extremists and allowed them to have body armor and weapons. And one of them threw a smoke bomb over the line of police at the left-wing protesters. And there was no action taken against them.
Right. None. You're correct. None.
Before or after? No.
None. No. To this day, and in all more disclosure, I have emailed her office multiple times asking her why, showing her the evidence. Like, here you have these Trump supporters committing assaults. These guys are Proud Boys. This one's an American Guard. Are you going to press charges against these individuals, bring charges against them? No, never once has she responded to me. Neither has William Hawkins, the DDA that was originally handling the case. I want to ask you, Mackenzie Harvey, who is another one of the DDAs down there in San Diego, who has been present at several of the court hearings. She came back and finally had a response about this. And she said, we charged what we thought happened based on what we saw on video, and the grand jury indicted based on what they heard and what they saw. So part two of that about the grand jury is not shocking. If you read the grand jury transcript, you see very clearly that that was sort of manufactured to look a certain way. They obviously did not show the grand jury the other videos of the assaults and these other evidence. You also had Matt Novak, who is the command that day in San Diego, giving testimony that basically said, quote unquote, the Patriot side was cooperative. We now know from the body cam that that's just not true. Yeah, but that is what the controlled environment was in the grand jury. But I want to address this first part. We charged what we thought happened based on what we saw on video. So she would have to be completely ignoring all these other videos that exist on these other individuals that she's using as witnesses. I don't understand this. This might be a better question for you, Curtis, but what are your thoughts on this?
So one of two things happened. Giving them the benefit of the doubt, integrity-wise, they're just so completely blindsided and they didn't do their job. So it's a level of incompetence that they didn't check anybody's story. They allowed people that are named, in this case as victims, to lie to them, not even at not high level or sophisticated lies,
right.
But things like, oh, we just showed up here today because we heard something, rather than saying, well, can you show us the text conversations you had with the people that you heard something about? Like, they didn't do anything investigative.
No, they did not.
If that's the case, then they are completely blindsided. If they really put their head in the sand and just took what these supposed victims who were lying to the police, if they took that at face value, then they committed malpractice at the grand jury level. I don't think that happened in its entirety. I think there was some prosecutorial malpractice at the grand jury level, but primarily what happened is they had always known they were going to prosecute Antifa in a case before January 9th. Leading up to January 9th, they had made up their mind that they wanted to prosecute Antifa for something. And as soon as they saw people that were anti-fascist and dressed in black, they implanted my belief that the evidence will come to light shortly, that they implanted government agents and undercover police officers to agitate. And they already had these people on the extreme right show up with military grade weapons, a smoke grenade. Right. That was Chad Alvarez, and hurl those actually at Jeremy, right at Jeremy White, right before the incident in which he's charged. Right. They hurl a military grade weapon device, and there's no disguise on Chad Alvarez's face. He does it right in front of the police. Right. So what the big elephant in the room, I think, for the prosecution is they had made up their mind they were prosecuting Antifa for something. This has been long in the works for Summer Stephan since she ran her campaign 2017, 2018. She's always planned. This was something that she wanted to check off on her resume. I'm a prosecute Antifa. Right. And they have completely ignored the volumes of evidence. I mean, the alley beating of the gentleman without the shoes on with his female partner. I get teary when I watch it, and I realize, like, hey, that's why Jeremy's fighting this case. That's why we're doing what we're doing is for people that were victimized like that. And Summer Stephan has turned her back on those people. And the prosecutors, if they don't immediately file charges on everybody involved in that beating and say, hey, we're sorry, we overlooked it, then they're just being dishonest, and they're intentionally.
I agree. They cannot possibly say, before you respond, Jeremy, they cannot possibly say they haven't seen this video, because I've personally emailed 3 versions of it to their office. And I could also identify 3 people in the video. So there's no excuse for that. Yeah. So Jeremy, I'm sorry.
They beat the woman in the video so bad that she wet herself, and then they bragged and
one of the Proud Boys, Alberto Nunez, actually said on the end of his live stream, "Oh look, she peed her pants and started laughing." Yeah, it's atrocious. It's absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, and of all of the things I saw so far in this case, I never saw an assault as vicious, brutal, coordinated, and unprovoked as the alley attack by the people on the extreme right. None of the people on the Antifa side, if you will, committed that level of brutality. I mean, I think some things were done that were wrong and that people need to be accountable, but it certainly wasn't Jeremy that did it. But it's the level. I mean, they coordinated, and one of the eerie things about the alley attack is after they're done with the coordinated beating of this man and his female partner.
And they hit her. Let's be clear. We'll play this video later, but they hit her. Yeah,
they beat her. But then you hear the word, and this is so chilling. And Stephan really should resign for not prosecuting with this one phrase. After they beat this person without shoes on, who was a model protester, had his hands up, was backing away. He was barefoot, couldn't defend himself. After they attacked him like a pack of wolves, you hear them give the order, fall back.
Yeah.
This was a military level, coordinated, right-wing extremist, vicious attack. Stephan should be ashamed of herself for not prosecuting those people.
And in fact, there is video. There was a Facebook Live that I also documented where you could hear them using some sort of communication device. It might have been the same one the Oath Keepers used at the January 6th thing, but on their cell phone. So one individual was live streaming. One of the right-wing extremists was live streaming from, I think she was a member of Exiled Patriots. She was live streaming on her phone, and this thing would chime in, boop, boop, and then it's supposed to block out what they're saying, but sometimes you can actually hear what they're saying. So a couple of times you hear somebody chime in and say, "Hey, we have Antifa at this rate. I need backup." I mean, they were absolutely 100% coordinating.
And the police, I mean, I wouldn't want to be in their shoes right now because they look horrible. All the investigators, the DA investigators, everybody looks awful because
I agree.
We expect, if we want to believe they're honest, we had to expect that all of these investigators missed the fact that these people were coordinating and provoking what happened. It's not a good look for San Diego Police Department or the San Diego County Investigative Bureau.
I agree.
It's dishonesty and incompetence is most likely. It's a combination of both, and it's sick.
I agree. And, let me say this as a journalist, I often get emails from various levels of DA's office, police, federal FBI, whatever. They always double check timestamps, metadata, and things. If they're using video for any sort of prosecution, they want to make sure that they've got the facts straight, right? No response from San Diego. No emails from the San Diego Police Department. So not only do they not initiate an investigation, which they should if they're using my video in the grand jury, they absolutely should do that. They didn't even respond to me when I reached out to them. I don't understand it. I really don't. Jeremy, what's your thoughts on that?
It's why are Peter Parker and Spider-Man never in the same room?
Yeah.
There's a lot of collusion. It's unfortunate. It seems like we've talked about Summer Stevens' history with these guys. This didn't start on January 9th. I'll let Curtis speak more to the details about it, but there's some possible quid pro quos and connections between them that go back to previous previous incidents that she's refused to prosecute.
100%. Well, let's talk about that for a second. I want to start actually by addressing her old campaign website, which I've seen and documented. It was full of anti-Semitic tropes. It was a picture of George Soros in front of some anti-fascists and Black Bloc. It had splashed across the anti-law enforcement money is coming to San Diego. Don't let it. things of this nature. It was a pretty appalling website. She's never apologized for it. I know Ken Stone had tried to track her down at a political event to get her to respond on it. She walked away from him. So she's trying to pretend like this website doesn't exist, but she can't deny that she didn't know about it because she tweeted it out on her Twitter account. I have that documented when she did it. So she was obviously fine with it, okay with it. So the argument that it was somebody else's campaign thing is just not going to hold water. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that she intentionally whipped up basically an orgy of anti-Semitism and hate and fear because she wanted to raise money. And I think that if you look at her career closely, she's worked hard and she's tried to do the right thing most of the time. But when she made the decision that she wanted that top elected law enforcement slot in the county, she lost sight of her responsibilities as a lawyer, as a prosecutor, and she entered into a very dirty political arena where she chose to use the same thing that unfortunately other high-profile politicians have done to try to get elected. And then she I think if you look at her, she's tried to step back from that, but she's never totally stepped back from it in actuality, and that's why she won't apologize. She wants to run for election again. She probably has other ambitions, and so she wants to leave her options open so that she can pivot harder to the extreme if she needs to in whatever future election she's looking at. So she's still being a politician while innocent people like Jeremy they're facing prison time.
Right. And, without equivocation, I can say that most journalists that have covered this case would agree with me on this. Nobody is suggesting that there weren't fights that broke out, that there weren't counter protesters, anti-fascists, whatever, that engaged in fighting with these guys. Nobody's denying that. It absolutely did happen. That's clear. The problem is that she's being very biased about what she's choosing to prosecute, and which is just an affront to our justice system. Laws are supposed to be applied universally. And I think most Americans want that to be the case. They lose trust in their institutions when it's obviously not happening that way, when there's political biases behind, decisions being made from the DA's office. It's very dangerous. So, and I've never seen such a clear-cut example of this. Truly, I haven't. It's just really continues to surprise me.
Well, Jeremy is the specific example of why the bias matters, because you can say, hey, she's biased, but she prosecuted 10 people correctly. She just missed other people that she should have prosecuted. That's bad. But if you want to see how her bias has actually affected her ability to prosecute the case, look at Jeremy. He never once struck anybody, never committed assault. They are accusing him of pointing at somebody who then gets assaulted. And there's a whole backstory to that has nothing to do with Jeremy. Jeremy's pointing down an alley. So at the point in time when the prosecutor becomes so biased against one side that they start to include innocent people into the prosecution, now you have the real example of why this is a problem for every single one of us. And that's Jeremy.
Yeah, let's talk about that particular, I believe it's named incident number 5 in the grand jury indictment. So that particular individual, I do have film of that. This is Ryan Luke. He had a very large knife. That's not up for debate. You see it. He has it out. It's not in his waistband.
Take it, homie. That's all shit, homie. He's got a knife. He's got a knife. He's got a knife.
I have footage of him earlier in the day where he was walking around with the knife. It's not the first time he pulled it out. So this is something that he had carried, was ready to use. And you're correct. There had been long-standing beefs between this individual and other counter protesters in San Diego. So you can't really look at any of these things in isolation per se, because one guy might have attacked somebody at a different one, then there was a reactionary response at a different one versus another one. There's been ongoing, arguments and confrontations between these individuals for many years, right? So you're correct on that. It's important that if you're a prosecutor, you look at the entirety of that if you want to be fair. It's wild, though, because if you look at Ryan's testimony about this, he's trying to paint himself as this innocent guy that was just attacked out of nowhere. He never mentions the knife. When he finally gets pressed on it during his testimony, is he had it for defense. I'm like, wait, nobody else had a knife, bro. You're like wielding a knife at a bunch of people in defense. It's just, I don't know. It seemed a little bit crazy to me and uneven. But Jeremy, what are your thoughts on that? How, when it was happening, what did you notice, et cetera?
Can I just stop? Let me just set something very specific so that everybody's aware. There's like a 30 or 40-second long continuous event, and there's some video, and it's from the time that Jeremy kind of points, and then Ryan Luke gets into a scuffle with a couple people, and this goes on for a little while, and then Jeremy sees Ryan Luke standing there with a knife. So just the way your question was, I wanted to make sure we start at the beginning of this, of this incident. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I wasn't there personally, so this is just video I've watched. This would be helpful.
I was standing in the street, kind of overlooking things, looking to see if anyone was injured, because there were little mini scuffles happening kind of all over. One of the right wingers had brought an airsoft or BB gun and had allegedly fired it at somebody. So there was a reason to be cautious. My recollection of the event leading up to Ryan Luke was that smoke grenade that Curtis had mentioned was thrown. In my experience, when smoke grenades are thrown, people get hurt. Visibility is reduced. Police tend to panic in those moments and swing their batons wildly. I've seen it firsthand. I was attempting to move or recommend moving the march down the alley that was to my left in the video, which is not in frame, but the alley is about 20 feet shy of Ryan Luke. And I've seen the video. It looks like I'm pointing down the alley saying, let's go this way. And right during that altercation or that incident, Ryan Luke gets confronted and a scuffle ensues. And that's when I saw the knife in his hand, a large, like 6-inch Bowie knife in his hand. I then followed close to that altercation just in case somebody was cut. I've treated knife wounds and slashes before at protests. So
I've seen stabbings and gunfire at protests. This has been happening the last couple of years. That's how far things have escalated. Yeah. You mentioned the BB gun. I want to ask you about that. So this juvenile. So we're not going to say other than the fact he's a juvenile. Obviously, he's been redacted on all the documents. He was arrested. My understanding is that, and also in that same footage where you hear people shouting knife, knife, you do hear somebody else saying he has a gun. So that is a reference to this. Sometimes BB guns do look like real guns, so I could understand why that would scare people too. But my understanding is that this juvenile had actually fired the BB gun at some counter protesters and then took off running. And that at that point, he was arrested by the PD. If you can hear in one of the officers' body cams where there's a conversation about this, one guy says there's somebody with a knife, and then some other stuff happens. And then this officer actually gets on his motorcycle and drives towards where this location is. At the tail end of his body cam, you see Ryan Luke come out on the other side of the alley and tell this officer that he was attacked. It's some crazy stuff, but did you see anything personally happen with this BB gun incident? I haven't seen any video on it, so I'd love more detail if you know anything about it.
No, I saw the juvenile in question. He was with a small group of others, and they were extremely aggressive. They approached the march. They were shouting. F Antifa, just trying to instigate, trying to engage. But the actual incident with the gun, I didn't see the weapon itself. I heard about that later after.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I don't think I heard about the BB gun until the arrest until the court case and everything. I was shocked to find out that actually happened, and I remembered the kid in question.
So
yeah, go ahead, Curtis.
One of the fascinating things about this, and again, why we're so concerned about Summer Stephan's ability to do her job to keep the community safe, is because we say BB gun. It was a 100% Glock replica with no marking on it that it was a BB gun. There was nothing there was no orange plastic on it. So this kid shows up to, there's some really good information right now. He shows up to this protest with a Glock in his waistband with a couple friends who later go lie to the grand jury about this. And he shoots at one of the people in this case who's charged. He shoots at them. That person believes they're being shot for real.
Right. If it looks like a Glock, sure.
Yeah, it's loud. It's, it's all happening so fast. And then he runs from them. But if the police would have done their job, they would have seen that this juvenile was also associated with one of the gentlemen who initiated the vicious alley attack. He was with one of the gentlemen that spit on the people they attacked, and that kicked off the attack. So you would have seen, I think my grandfather used to say, you don't have to have a size, bigger than a size 2 hat to figure out that the juvenile showed up armed with a Glock, was with people that were provoking violence and beating people viciously.
Yeah.
That juvenile is not a victim in this situation, and his friends are not victims. They were provocateurs. They were there to start exactly what they started, and somehow this was kind of swept under the rug. Now our information is that this juvenile has no pending criminal action against him, even though they did arrest him, one of the few arrests for possession of the BB gun, not the assault, even though they had all that information. But he actually has, because I tried to obtain the file, and he has no pending criminal action. So that case went away for him.
So let's talk about that a second. So this kid, the person that you're mentioning, his name is James Kennard. So he was there earlier in the day at the boardwalk, actually. And the reason this matters is the available body cam footage from the day starts at around 2:00 in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. It's still not clear to me if that's because they didn't have their body cams on earlier in the day, weren't paying as much attention. Not clear to me why that is, but the available. Okay, please. Yes.
Yeah, there was no police presence on the boardwalk for the first part of the action.
Okay.
The first time I saw police was in the street off of the boardwalk. They had maintained a line, and that's where the right wingers were stationed with the other people. And I say right wing extremists because this isn't just like Trump supporters or
I agree.
Republicans. This is mixed in, full body armor. Weapons on their hips, and all of them have a history of assaulting, minorities.
They absolutely do. Yes, they absolutely do, including one of the organizers, Damian Russell. We'll get into him a little later on the show. He had a telegram that had full-blown Hitler apology on it, like Hitler worship, I would say. So we'll talk about all that. Let's turn now for a second to, I want to play this clip. This is body cam footage from the aerial. So the aerial footage from the afternoon was very interesting to me because through the aerial footage, it's through the Able helicopter, you have all of dispatch you can hear. So you can hear often other officers calling into command, dispatch calling in about things that she's hearing or calls that she's getting, letting people know. So it gives you a very broad overview of the afternoon. So the aerial footage starts out about a little bit before 4:00, I believe. So I want to play this clip.
100 Charles, this protest appears to be hijacked by the Proud Boys. They're not willing to go with the program, very anti-police, and we had that discussion with them.
The group that he is monitoring with the Central Bike units, that protester group is being hijacked by the Proud Boys who are very anti-police and they're refusing to comply.
Concerned that the brother will harm the ex-boyfriend in the
airport. 110 Lincoln is taking a squad down there.
Boyfriend's going to be
And 110 Lincoln, we've got another team, Morgan, plus the bike team up.
10-4, just on officer safety too, we do have somebody texting in on 911 saying that they're watching a YouTube live stream. Subject out there is displaying a black switchblade in his right hand, pure steel white male, 50 to 60s, balding, gray hair with a mustache, and it looks like the feet ended.
5 will be 13195.
Okay, is anybody in contact with their organizer?
Yeah, 560 Sam, myself and 69 Bike tried to make contact with the organizer. Protests have been hijacked by Proud Boys. They're no longer cooperating with police.
So after hearing that clip, let me ask you this. This contradicts Matt Novak's testimony in the grand jury. He basically said the quote unquote Patriot side was being cooperative. Clearly that's not the case.
Yeah, he was deceptive with the grand jury. He also, I believe that he also watched Chad Alvarez without any disguise throw a smoke grenade at Jeremy White. Didn't do anything about it. And
yeah, let's talk about that for a second before we get into the rest of this aerial footage. He did walk across. You see this in the body cam footage. He walks in front of Matt Novak, and before he pulls it out and throws it. I want to mention, obtained through a FOIA request. I can tell you that Chad Alvarez, and this was not in your motion, but you should probably know about this. Chad Alvarez was under investigation at that particular moment by the Joint Terrorism Task Force. The Joint Terrorism Task Force is the FBI and the Sheriff's Department. Obviously, the people they look at are very serious. Domestic terrorists, whatnot, neo-Nazi groups, Peckerwoods, extremists of this sort. So the fact that that was the case leads me to believe that this individual had been involved in something more serious prior to that. So just to mention that on the side, but
yeah, it's not an accident that he happened to have a military grade device in his possession. Who knows what else he had in his possession? To this day, I mean, that was years ago. To this day, San Diego District Attorney's Office has never taken any action against Chad Alvarez. He's free to go out there and do whatever he wants in the community.
Right.
But yeah, this narrative that people on the right, or call them the Trump supporters in general were cooperative. That's wrong. There was people out there that were on the extreme right that were anti-police, that were brandishing weapons. There is one person who's labeled as a victim in this case. Just absolutely stuns me. As a criminal defense attorney, I've never seen somebody so in the wrong be labeled as a victim. Then they go to try to protect his identity. His initials, I'll use them just to honor their order against binding to me and Jeremy. It's CB. CB is he runs the website called Citizen Cop Watch. So he is a kind of oriented against police. And he live streams himself. I guess he has an audience. He's talking to his audience constantly. He's arguing and harassing law enforcement and distracting them, just blatantly yelling at them, screaming at them. Then he's trying to provoke fights. One motorcycle cop comes up to him who knows him and says, "Look, you're about to get us both in a fight. Please stop that." And CB is yelling all this stuff. He puts on these Kevlar gloves. He films himself putting on Kevlar gloves, says he's going to knock Antifa's teeth out. They're going to come his way. He's going to attack them. Then a couple kids who are not dressed in black, by the way, they don't look like the Antifa description that the prosecutor's using. They look like a couple skateboarders from Pacific Beach, end up confronting him. He pulls out a knife and he's waving it around on his live stream. It is a folding knife, which is why I think it's a similar incident. And then he goes on to provoke and challenge one of the defendants in this case to a fight. He beats up the defendant. A couple people jump in. According to CB, he tells his audience, "I barely got a scratch on my nail." And then he turns around and he starts calling somebody. He uses the word, and I'm sorry to use it here, but this is what we have to see that Summer Stephan's doing. He turns to some kid who's like, "Hey, it looks like you got beat up by those guys." And he's like, "No, I didn't. I barely scratched a nail, faggot." And he starts calling this young kid faggot. The kid hits him with a skateboard. And then CB turns around, gloating to his listeners, saying, "I knew I would trigger him. I knew I would trigger him. That's why I did it." This is the type of people that Summer Stephan is protecting. People who are armed, brandishing weapons, harassing law enforcement, and provoking fights against kids. That's the type of, that's the quality of the victims in this case. And it's absolutely unacceptable. Captain Novak lied, knew all of this, and he lied to the grand jury.
Yeah, this is wild. I mean, given, this happened 3 days after the insurrection as well. Clearly, the individuals on the Capitol that day had no respect for the police officers. They attacked multiple of them. One of them died. Like, this is the original ACAB, so to speak, are right-wing extremists, right? Peckerwoods and things.
Has a police officer in America ever died due to an altercation with Antifa?
With Antifa? No, not that I'm aware of. Never. No.
Once?
No. So yes, I agree with you. So if you look at even the Department of Justice data on this will show you the vast majority of violence comes from right-wing extremists. Almost entirely from right-wing extremists, if you're talking about with law enforcement and whatnot. You will see jaw-jacking, from leftist protesters. And most of that time, that has to do with the fact that they want change. They want racial bias removed from the police force. They want the laws to be applied universally. So this, to me, you cannot really put these into the same mix and say that they're identical belief systems, because they're not. The right wing is not.
And the way this plays out in real life is it's perverse, but law enforcement protected the extreme right, who was not loyal to law enforcement, killed an officer. They did all this violent stuff, but then they act out on the extreme left. And Jeremy's an example of that. Torrance Police Department broke Jeremy's back at a Black Lives Matter protest in about a year or two before January 9th. That's a big reason why Jeremy wears gear, wears all this stuff, because the police viciously beat him and struck him so hard they broke one of his. I didn't
know that. That's terrible.
Yeah.
I was with Black Lives Matter in LA working on the Christopher DeAndre Mitchell awareness campaign. This young man was sleeping in his car in a parking lot. Cops rolled up and shot him within 15 seconds, shot him dead. Wouldn't release the names, wouldn't release the footage. We had just been going to the town hall, and we put our names in, we would speak, we would chant, and then we would leave. And we did it week after week after week, and the pressure was mounting. And the mayor of Torrance was just done hearing about it, so he ordered the cops to clear the room violently with their batons. And we were out the door, yelling back and forth. The cops were pushing us out. We all got out. And then myself and another individual noticed a young woman organizer from BLM was back in the room to get the mother of the slain person. Her purse was in there. So she went to get it and watched a cop rear up and go to beat her mercilessly. So we ran in to say, hey, wait. And we both got locked in the room and jumped. I had a portion of my back, my transverse process on my one of my vertebrae, or my lumbar section of my spine was snapped off completely. I still deal with it every day. I can't even stand up for more than 2 hours without pain. A friend of mine that was there lost a portion of their finger due to a baton hit.
Wow.
So we were chanting. We were in there asking for accountability. So I've been to Standing Rock. I went out there on a humanitarian aid mission to bring food and cold weather gear, and met with Sophia Wolanski, who had her arm blown off by a concussion grenade, and Red Fawn, who had lost an eye to a rubber bullet, who were just peacefully protesting. So I've seen it all over the country. I've been a victim of it myself, and it definitely informed me wanting to protect myself, because I want to be out there. I want to help. I want to continue to give aid to the community, and can only take so many hits.
No, I feel you. Well, that also would inform how you handle yourself going forward. If you've had bad run-ins, it's understandable to not trust police departments. I want to talk about the expert witness that Summer Stephan brought into the grand jury. Her name is Dawn Perlmutter, and she's, let me just say, without equivocation, she's clearly not a witness or an expert witness. Not only is she biased, she doesn't get the basic stories correct. And that includes, that includes people on the right. I mean, her story about some of the things she said about the Proud Boys are entirely inaccurate. And if she'd been an expert, she'd know that. But I want to go through some of her testimony, because this is the person that she brought in to tell the grand jury about Antifa. One of the things that she said during her testimony that I thought was crazy was she referred to BLM as a nationalist group. which is wild to me. No, BLM is a movement. It's not even an organized group, and it's certainly not nationalist.
No,
that would make them right wing.
Yeah, they're not nationalist. They would be upset if they did that.
But I mean, she actually goes and she says that, she makes the case about, she tries to say the Black Bloc. And I think the reason she does this is because you'll see Stephan's indictment says, put on Black clothing as part of her conspiracy. So part of your conspiracy is that you wore Black clothing to this protest. But Black Bloc is not exclusive to anti-fascists. Black Bloc is a tactic. It's even been used by those on the right. I've seen Trump supporters dress all in Black Bloc before they've committed acts of violence. So this idea that it's strictly an anti-fascist tactic is false one. But it also doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is going to commit an act of violence because they're dressed in Black Bloc. I think a lot of times anti-fascists dress in Black because they want to sort of become one unit and not about individuals, identified individuals, right? So let's go through some of that stuff that you found to be problematic. What are your thoughts on the Black Bloc thing, the BLM thing, and some of the other things that you mentioned in your motion?
I think this supposed expert's entirely problematic. I'll answer your questions directly in a second, but let me just say that, it's pretty easy to find expert witnesses in the United States. Law enforcement, FBI. There's a lot of expert witnesses. They went all the way to Pennsylvania to find somebody who has a degree in art.
I didn't know that. That's wild.
Yeah, has an art degree. Studies symbology. Right. So like she goes to a crime scene and helps law enforcement understand like the layout of a satanic, design.
Pentagram or something.
Where the candles are located, if that means something. She's like one step away from a psychic. That's who they fly in from Pennsylvania. Now at the time they fly her in and they pay her.
$3.50 an hour, I believe they paid her some ridiculous sum.
She's at that time, she's so hard up for money. She's suing her sibling over an inheritance. She can't afford her own attorney, so she represents herself, and she files so many bad faith claims that the court tells her she cannot file anything else. In California we call it a vexatious litigant, right? And then another side note is she applies for this town council position to help choose who the law enforcement hires are going to be, and they reject her. And she goes to the press like complaining, like, how could you reject me? Like I help law enforcement, and I mean it's like she's a joke. And
I mean, she's a joke. Listen, the reason they couldn't have an expert from the FBI show up is because number one, the FBI would have said that Antifa isn't a formal organization. That's just nonsense. They would say, Christopher Reyes said this multiple times to Congress, it's a movement. It's there is no hierarchy, there is no boss, there is no cells. It's just a movement, and most of the time autonomous collective sort of thing. So that would explain why they would have to get such a crazy person.
Strategically, they could not have had a truly knowledgeable expert in any of this, because it would have been used against them with the American Guard, with Defend East County, because anybody that would have known would have also said, hey, these people showing up, with the weapons and the knives, they intended to do some harm. And it would have been at minimum a more fair discussion rather than what happened. But it wasn't a real expert. I mean, at some point she even throws in like Antifa kills cats, which is like the craziest thing I've ever heard.
She did say that. But specifically, I think she said Antifa kills law enforcement officers' cats. Like it was weird.
Yeah, right. And so she's done some, she's hard up for money. She gets contacted through some right-wing nut channel of Summer Stephens. She has an opportunity to get flown out to California and make $10,000 or $15,000 and testify to some things she Googled. And she didn't have this stuff right. She wasn't a real expert. I feel bad if they're going to put her on the stand. She's going to get eviscerated by trained professionals who understand the limits of what she knows. And so, her information was inaccurate, incorrect.
It was terrible. Yeah.
in front of I mean, for the audience that doesn't know, in a grand jury, there's nobody there really to ask counter questions or to be adverse to anybody's position. Well, in front of the jury, we're going to annihilate this woman. She's not going to be able to, she's not going to be able to justify like where she has knowledge. Like you have to do more than Google people to become an expert in a subject matter, especially something like this, where she's been on Twitter and she's listened to what certain right-wing candidates have said, and that became her expert testimony. And it's actually it's a joke, but it's not funny because she ended up creating an indictment that's forcing a lot of people to have to plead guilty to very, very serious crimes. And at one point they told Jeremy 7 years in prison for him. 7 years in prison for showing up to be a medic and pointing down an alley. They want to give him 7 years in prison.
That's insane.
Yeah, I have zero criminal record. I've been arrested a couple times on civil disobedience with no charges. Yeah,
that's insane. That's absolutely the most insane thing I've ever heard. Yeah. So she, I would be surprised actually if they ended up bringing her in for the trial. Maybe they have to because they've opened the door at this grand jury testimony. I'm not sure how that works, but I have to say, reading through that was really laughable at certain points. I was literally chuckling. And let me make this really clear again. She couldn't even get basic things right about the right wing that she's supposed to be, on the side of, so to speak. So yeah, definitely not an expert, said some crazy stuff. I don't see how that helps the case.
I'd love to circle back to the black bloc thing.
Sure.
Because I've done a lot of thought about this over the years. For myself and others that I know and have known throughout my time in the movement, black bloc is not an excuse or method for committing crimes. It is a means of protection from doxing from right-wing bad faith actors and unfair prosecution from law enforcement. I've never gone out there with the intention to break the law or to hurt anybody. My intention has always been community defense and safety and mutual aid. Most actions that we attended as medics, nothing happened. It was us handing out hydration packs and spraying hands with hand sanitizer and making sure people had masks. That was the purview of most of my work out there. It was nice when we didn't have to treat a cut or a person with pepper spray all over their face. I've been doxxed. I've been doxxed by Andy No, by some other like fascists down in Orange County. I've had them show up to my door. There's a reason that we protect our identity, and it's not for bad faith reasons. It's not to be able to go out there with impunity and wreak havoc. I mean, I'm not stupid. I understand that we live in a surveillance state. Everything is documented. Everything is traced back. If they really want, they can trace you all the way back to the door of your house via satellite. So like, it's just merely a means of protecting oneself from the first level of violent response from them, which is doxing and finding you and confronting you. So, and black is sexy.
Black. I obviously I like black. I wear black t-shirts all the time. So I understand that. That makes sense. Let me ask Curtis. Let me ask you this, just from purely a legal perspective. This would not be the first time a DA has been disqualified for political bias. Do you think there's enough precedence there for this to actually happen? Having attended some of these court hearings, I think the judge has been pretty even-handed and fair thus far. He has not given Stephan everything she's asked for. That's definitely the case. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, we have a highly competent judge who was also a highly competent and successful prosecutor. So I think he understands the standards at which a prosecutor should operate. And I don't think he's afraid to press the prosecution. I mean, I don't think he's going to give us a disqualification easily, but he will look at the law and he will do what he believes is right. I don't expect he's going to cover anyone's ass. He doesn't seem like he seems like his primary concern is being a professional judge that does what a judge is supposed to do. And that's why we're pretty comfortable in his courtroom.
Yeah.
but disqualifications are hard. They are an uphill battle, but in this case, I believe it's viable.
Yeah.
I don't know if it will be granted. I can tell you this, we have more information than we put in the motion. We were limited by resources and both time and money. And, it was a hard motion to put together. My team has, I'd say my team has at least 300 hours into this right now.
Wow.
And so we feel very confident, comfortable with our arguments. We feel strongly that there's more than just a disqualification at stake here. This is the only way to hold Summer Stephan accountable is to file a motion like this. We've won this motion by filing it. We've told the truth and we've explained to people how it impacts the community and real prosecutions or the lack of real prosecutions that are happening. So Jeremy White having the desire and the will and the courage to fight this and empowering his legal team to pursue this, we've already won.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the long version. Sorry. The short version is, yeah, there's legal precedent for this. And we were able to disqualify the San Luis Obispo Attorney's Office or District Attorney's Office, a gentleman by the name of Dan Dow. And
right.
He did some very, very similar things, but they weren't as egregious as it is in this case. He used Black Lives Matter and the prosecution of Black Lives Matter to try to raise money for his campaign. And he let people go that were on the right because he believed and was aligned with them politically. And so he let a couple people that assaulted some people, people that tried to run over protesters. He didn't prosecute those people. And he prosecuted my client for, I don't know, everything under the sun, including some creative forms of false imprisonment for blocking traffic.
Wow.
And we were able to have him removed. He appealed that to the appellate court. We won at the appellate court level. And then he tried to go to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, we're not going to hear this case. So that was a huge victory. Something similar, that case is called People v. Lastra. There was a lot of us involved. I wasn't the only one that did it.
Okay.
But that case was used in San Francisco to remove their DA from a case recently. She had made a particular case a point in her bid to be elected. And,
against Chesa Boudin?
Yeah. Oh,
okay.
Yeah. Well, Chesa was recalled and then Brooke was put in and then she ran. She actually ran against Mr. Lightfoot's counsel, John Hamasaki.
Oh, that's right. John Hamasaki was running. That's right. Okay.
So, and this is very similar to Summer Stephan. Brooke Jenkins is trying to campaign. She picks a case that she thinks is Chesa is being too soft on, or he was too soft on, and that nobody will be hard enough on. And then she takes over that prosecution when she's elected, and the defense attorneys get her kicked off because, you made that case so political.
Right.
So political. In fact, it helped you get elected. You knew you were doing that, and nobody expects you to be fair after that. And it's just on these little details. And so Summer Stephan has done the identical thing. She put out false information connecting Antifa to George Soros. She doctored the photos. She raised money. She sought donations. White supremacists helped donate. A lot of good people did too. She generated campaign income. And then lo and behold, when there's a mutual fray, she only prosecutes Antifa. So I think that she should be disqualified. I think we have the legal high ground here. We have the moral high ground. But I can see some things that the judge might try to say to dispel it. But we're going to move right into another series of motions that will litigate these issues again. It just won't be a disqualification. It'll be for dismissal. So we just want a fair prosecutor.
Right.
Jeremy White's going to go to trial, and we're going to clear his name at trial. But we want to do it with a fair prosecutor. He's entitled to that. And the community needs to see it. The community needs to see that San Diego County District Attorney can be fair.
I agree. I don't disagree with that. One last thing I want to talk about with you is, you just mentioned actually, is the money that went into her campaign in 2018. You know, I pulled up some of her campaign donations for those years that she was initially running for DA. And you're right, she took money in from some right-wing extremists, including Chris Wyrick, who was one of the American Guardsmen that was there at the Pacific Beach the protest that day. He's been at many others where he has assaulted people. He, you know, clearly went after me one day when I was covering a protest in El Cajon. So this guy is a very violent guy, has a history of violence. But really disturbing is the money that I want to talk about with Tony Kraverick, who is the ex-GOP chair for the city of San Diego. He's now moved on from that position, but he was the chair for many years. You know, this is a guy who had made this Hitler video, literal Hitler video, where he's doing a Sieg Heil Roman salute in it, where there's a bouncing Hitler around. He's done that. Both of his kids are very problematic. One applied to be a member of Patriot Front, which is a neo-Nazi organization. You know, so clearly we'll get into more, I'll get more into details of this separate from you, but tracing that money through, again, is this a case where she was simply unaware of who these individuals were and took the money in good faith? Does she not care? Is she, you know, in agreement with some of their positions? Like, what are we to take away from these donations?
I think that she wants to make the Republican Party happy. You know, she doesn't want to create discord. At least at that time she didn't. Now she's gone independent. She's trying to distance herself. But I think that's basically just a show. But I think she knew who she was taking the money from. I think, you know, this goes to the heart of what we're saying the problem is here. She doesn't see it as a real wrong. She doesn't think, you know, she doesn't think to herself, you know, does Tony Kraverick expect something from me because he directed $50,000+ towards me? Yeah. She doesn't see that as a problem. I mean, maybe it's not, you know, the end of the world for a prosecutor to take money from somebody who's immoral or doing things illegal. And maybe the prosecutor knows, maybe they don't know. Maybe that's not the end of the world. But when those groups think that they own you, and then you in turn do exactly what those groups want you to do, including protecting them from crime, that is a huge problem. And she has to look at that. And, you know, she's got a very powerful family herself. She can't afford to be projecting that belief to anybody, whether she believes it or not. That's the image that she's portraying, and she's spotlighting that. That's almost like the bat signal for the Chris Wyricks, you know, who've done a lot more than donate. They've showed up to all of her events, her speeches. They brought their wives, they brought their families. I mean, they're huge supporters. She knows who they are. And if she would have ever sat down and I mean, we assume she knows what's going on in her jurisdiction, but let's say she didn't, and she watched all the footage you have or the things we said in the motion, she should have picked up the phone and said, I want you to indict Chris Wyrick right now.
I agree. I agree.
If she doesn't do that, then she's absolutely 100% knowingly harboring white supremacist violent actors who are committing crime in her jurisdiction. So now she's on notice. She was on notice when you've emailed her and you've sent her documentation. She was on notice if she's read the papers in her jurisdiction, which we know she has, her prosecutors have. Then now she's on notice. So now we can look at what she does. She doesn't indict these people, then she's harboring white supremacists. That's it.
Yeah. On that note, are there any other things that I haven't asked you about that you think are important to the case?
I don't know if this is important to the case, but I'd love to set the narrative straight on something that has bothered me since the arrest.
Okay.
I was called an animal abuser by LA Times and several other outlets because I was initially charged with cruelty to animals. I was on the boardwalk. I was on one end of the boardwalk on the edge of the protest, and I heard something going on the other side. I looked. There was a man with a 110, 120-pound Rottweiler aggressively threatening and getting in the face of protesters as he walked right through our crowd. He was instigating. He was shaking the dog at them, trying to get the dog to kind of engage. I shouted out, "Make a hole." I split the crowd in half, and I got a safe egress for him and the dog out so nobody would get assaulted. As he was leaving, he was defeated. Nobody was engaging with him. They were giving him a wide berth. As he was leaving, somebody behind me shouted something incendiary, like, "You better run." He turned around and started coming right for me with his dog. And I begged him over and over, "Please don't do this. Please don't. Go away. Just go. It's over." And the dog started viciously growling within 5 feet of me, and I deployed bear mace that I had for self-protection. In my opinion, I saved that dog's life. If it had attacked me, it would have been put down by animal services or hurt by the crowd for attacking one of their own. So it really bothers me, this narrative that I'm an animal abuser. I have a rescue dog that I love to death that I took off the street. He's an emotional support animal. I suffer with my physical disability from the police assault and depression, and there's days where he's the only reason I get out of bed. So it's important for me to set that narrative straight.
100%. And in fact, I guess the reason I had even forgotten this had happened is because Stephan was not able to get an indictment on this.
The grand jury saw the evidence and refused to indict because it was very obvious I was being attacked with an animal as a weapon.
Right.
Yeah. So thank you.
Indeed. No, thank you for bringing that up. I'd actually forgotten that it even happened.
A couple of things I would like to mention. In my eyes, it's an honor to represent Jeremy as a hero. He was out doing what we want people to do. I don't think people understand how hard this is. In addition to him being told, "Hey, they're going to try to send you to prison for 7 years," in addition to having to go to San Diego and have all this hanging over his head, we're facing a 4-month trial. And Jeremy's not wealthy. Jeremy is a committed artist, supports himself, and pays rent. He's got to be in. Now he's falsely accused. That the proof of that's on video. He has to be in San Diego for 4 months. He has to find a place to live. He has to find a way to pay his rent. And we're not even talking about how the legal team's going to make it, because we're pro bono for trial. So we're the same way. But I don't expect anybody to have sympathy on me. This is my job. But Jeremy's falsely accused in this.
Yeah.
And he's now facing not only prison, but even if he wins, homelessness, because of the lack of resources to relocate to San Diego for this trial. I've asked for severance off of everybody just so we could have a shorter trial. I don't think I'll get it. This is a really sad thing. The prosecutorial power is so great. Yeah. You have the ability to drag people through all of these very challenging circumstances. And I hope that the public, when they see Jeremy, give him a big hug and say, "Thank you for everything you're doing for us. And thank you for fighting this case," because not everybody had enough hope to fight it.
No. And in fact, let me ask you this as an attorney. I know a lot of the younger folks, a couple of them had public defenders. They couldn't afford expensive legal representation. They took pleas. And oftentimes people take plea bargains, not because they're guilty of anything, but because they can't afford to fight the charges. And if a DA comes out you with the full force of her office and she basically says, if you say you're guilty of this, I'll give you less years. I will give you less years for doing that than what you would face at a trial. You should do this, right? So that is not an uncommon thing that you'll see a prosecutor's office do. Is it justice? I don't think it is. I think it's sort of a bastardization of what justice is supposed to be. Having good legal representation, having your day in court, the things that we consider to be so important to be an American, shouldn't be based on how much money you have. But here we are. It absolutely is based on how much money you have. So do you think it would have been different if some of these other individuals had better representation or could afford that?
I don't know exactly what the representation was like. I'll be honest. I'm from out of town, and I came in on Jeremy's case at a specific request.
Okay.
I do know that there was a lot of evidence to look through. We've got 300 hours into it.
Wow. Yeah.
And I don't think that a lot of the people who were appointed as attorneys really had the economic ability to spend 300 hours on anything.
Right.
I've done a lot of this pro bono. I've volunteered a lot of time, and I've got a couple of volunteers. We've been able to raise some money for cost from the public. It's an enormous fight. So I don't know exactly what was going on with legal representation. I assume some of those attorneys were very, very good. I think that the problem is, in addition to economics, the problem is what they did. So let's call somebody John Smith. Let's say he was out there in Black Bloc, Antifa, and he hits somebody. They took John Smith at 18 years old and they said, "Hey, John, we're going to put you in prison for 8 years for everything that happened that day. We're going to call it a big conspiracy, and we're going to put you in prison for 8 years. Or you can just plead guilty.
Right.
We'll put a 1-year limit on it, and we'll give you the chance for your attorney to pitch the judge and giving you no time at all."
Right.
And now 18-year-old John Smith is like, "Oh, okay, I can put a 1-year limit on how much time in jail I'll do, and I can get a chance to pitch a judge for 0 time." So those attorneys, I think many reasonable, effective attorneys would say
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, look, John, take this plea bargain. Let me save you from going to prison for 6 or 8 years. And that's what happened with most of these people, based on what I can see. But let's just remember that juvenile that went out there with that Glock and shot at these people and got caught has no criminal case pending. He didn't have to plea to anything. He's not looking at any jail time. And I just want to bring it back to that point, because that's why we filed this motion. It's completely unfair what they like. Basically, Summer Stephan is a terrorist. She has terrorized people and prosecuted them unfairly and forced people into plea bargains. Her office has done everything that's wrong with the criminal justice system, and it exists in this one case.
I would have just responded to an email or a knock on the door. They didn't need 40 officers with AR-15s at 4 in the morning.
Yeah, that was wild. A lot of officers. Yeah, that seemed a little bit. Was that just some unprecedented?
Or however many there were. My one remark when being carted off to the cop car was, we could have healthcare, but we have this. It's just insane how much money was poured into this.
Indeed. Well, thanks for talking with me. This has been very informative. Honestly, I think this is the first time anyone has had the opportunity to speak with any of the defendants in a lengthy conversation. I think a lot of people will find this, a lot of this information to be eye-opening. I appreciate that, and good luck at trial. We will be definitely keeping an eye on this.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's really been a pleasure, and it's an honor that, like I said, you're the most important people to us to set the record straight, to try to undo some of the unfair prejudice that's been, perpetrated on Jeremy's reputation, and frankly, they've put his fair trial rights in jeopardy by putting out all this false information. So, thanks for giving us an opportunity to correct that.
Absolutely, democracy dies in the dark. Nothing's truer.
And I want to thank Curtis, man. You landing in my corner was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. You and your team are giving me hope when I was hopeless. So thank you.
Okay, so that was my interview with criminal defense attorney Curtis Briggs, who filed a motion this week to have the San Diego District Attorney's Office disqualified for her connections to right-wing extremists, white extremists. Kind of can be used interchangeably, and also some dark money that she has taken from individuals related to the campaign. And Jeremy White, who is his client, Jeremy is facing charges for being, quote unquote, a member of Antifa, and conspiracy charges, assaults, whatnot, in this case that DA Summer Stephan is trying to try down in San Diego. Before I get to the second interview, which is with attorney Bryan Pease, who brought a lawsuit against the city of San Diego and the San Diego Police Department for their bias in regards to the same protests, Before I get to that interview, I do want to go back and play for you 2 versions of the alley attack that was discussed during this interview at great length. One version is filmed by Amy Zamadio, who was an activist who works with housing and unhoused folks there in San Diego, locally in Pacific Beach. She was there that day not for the counter protest, but just because she's down there on a regular basis helping folks that are homeless. That's her job. And then the second version is the one that was filmed by a Proud Boy, Albert Nunez. And you can hear all of the things that he says, including at the very end of it, after this woman is brutally assaulted. He points out here and laughs and says, "Look, she wet her pants." So I just want folks to see this.
And sleep in this alley.
What would you do if you had one of those by themselves? What would you do?
Okay, so we're surrounded. This is where all my homeless people sleep. This is where all my friends sleep, right here.
Go ahead, start swinging, motherfucker, because you're gonna
No justice, no peace bullshit. Fuck you and your bullshit ass fucking reason for being out here.
No.
What's up, dude? What's up?
Oh my God! Whoa!
That's it.
Stop it! Stop it! Stop it right now! Get off of him!
Go back.
Yeah! You guys! My homeless friends sleep right here! Stop it!
Fuck out of here. Yeah, come on, dude.
Do you know how many people live in this alley?
You pissed yourself too, bitch.
Yeah, fuck you.
Fuck you too. You fucking twat waffle.
Oh my God.
Fuck around and find out, motherfucker.
You guys, a lot of homeless people sleep in this alley. I do homeless outreach, and everyone is scared.
Okay, so that was Amy's, and let's play the second one. This is filmed by Alberto Nunez, who is a Proud Boy. And then I want to point out the guy that you see with the stick that has orange on it. He's also a Proud Boy. His name is Dave Smith. And then the guy that initiates the attack, who I believe he might be the one saying fall back at the end. His name is James Kennard, and he is a member of the American Guard. Let's play the second version.
What's up? Do it. Yeah, Warren. Come in. Warren, that's out of the way. Whoa! Fall back.
Get off of him! You guys, my homeless friends sleep right here! Stop it!
Yeah, fuck Antifa! Get the fuck out of here! Yeah, come on, dude. Now go! Nose is broken. Fuck you, homie, what's up? Hey, America! You pissed yourself too, bitch!
Yeah, fuck you.
Fuck you too!
I have to pee like this whole time.
Fucking twat waffle!
Babe, pee your pants.
What's up?
Oh,
Warren, cut back! Out of the way!
Oh, fuck!
Fall back!
You guys, my homeless friends sleep right here! Stop it!
Yeah, fuck Antifa! Get the fuck out of here! Yeah, come on, dude. Get the fuck out!
Hey, your nose is broken. Your nose is broken.
Fuck you, homie, what's up? Hey, America! You pissed yourself too, bitch!
Yeah, fuck you. No, I didn't. I have to pee like this whole time.
Fucking twat waffle!
All right, so we saw all 3 versions there. Actually, every time I see this footage, I get upset because none of these individuals have been charged with assault. or anything whatsoever. And then you have Jeremy, who the defendant we just heard from. The incident that he's involved in, what he's accused of is what she's saying, that he pointed out somebody to attack, and really he's just pointing at a location down the alley, because this is an alley. This alley where we were just see this attack happen. Multiple right-wing extremists had been coming down this alley all day and infiltrating like the counter-protest side. And we'll talk more about that in part 2 of this special report next week. Next, I want to play the interview with Bryan Pease. So Bryan Pease is bringing litigation against the city of San Diego and the police department for being biased. Basically, the premise is when the police department called an unlawful assembly, they only forced the counter-protesters to leave. They did not force the Trump people to leave. The city attorney has made the argument that this wasn't a political decision based on one side was right-wingers, the other was left-wingers, but rather they only dispersed one side of the protest because that was where all the violence was happening. Well, you know, the violence was happening there because, again, you had the Trump people coming around to the back of this, where the counter protesters were instigating confrontations, and nobody was stopping them from that happening. And I do think that there is an element of political bias involved in that. So we're going to talk to Bryan Pease next. And then I want to mention, make sure you stay tuned for part 2 of the special report, because I did speak with multiple protesters that were present that day at this protest. We get their perspective. And I also spoke with a couple of individuals that have been in San Diego working as activists, participating in protests for years, who have had ongoing issues with some of these right-wing extremists. One in particular has been also assaulted by some of these same individuals, wanted to press charges, but the DA refused to bring charges against him. We'll talk about that next week. And then I want to also mention that if you are interested in seeing any of this body cam footage in the issue of transparency, I have uploaded all of the body cam footage in full to the District 34 YouTube account. It's uncut, unedited. If you want the time to dig through that, some of these videos are quite long, but you know, in the interest of transparency, go ahead and look at this stuff and see what you think. And now let's play the Bryan Pease interview. With Bryan Pease, who is the attorney that is bringing the action against the city of San Diego and the police department for their bias on January 9th. Welcome, Bryan.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
So one of the things that you're talking about in your case, you used a lot of the police body cam footage for the day. You obviously went through all of that and pulled out, you know, the really clear parts where it shows the bias. But one of the things you notice is that there is not a monolithic group or opinion coming from the police that were on the line that day, but there is one coming from command. At various points in the body cam footage, you can hear various officers basically say to the command, hey, Proud Boys have, you know, taken over the protest. They're not being cooperative.
100 Charles, this protest appears to be hijacked by the Proud Boys. They're not willing to go with the program, very anti-police, and we had that discussion with them.
You know, another time where they said that some of these guys are being belligerent because they're drunk. Et cetera, et cetera. So it paints a really clear picture of the fact that this was not a one-sided problem. It was not a mutual fray. That the Patriot side, as Novak calls it, was not being cooperative. So what I'm wondering is how is it that Matt Novak could come into your deposition and say, to quote unquote, that they were very cooperative? Those are his words. And then you look at the body cam footage and you see that that's not the case.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it had to do with initially what he meant by the Proud Boys side and the pro-Trump side being quote unquote cooperative, was that they were allowing these guys to do whatever they wanted to. So they took over the whole span of Mission Boulevard at the Hornblende intersection. They were just completely spanning the intersection, and the police were being very friendly to that pro-Trump side and letting them just continue to march back and forth, brandishing rolled up flag poles to use as weapons, and in one case, an individual threw a smoke grenade at the anti-Trump side as they were approaching. So that the pro-Trump side was just allowed to do whatever they wanted to do, and that's why they were. So in fact, they were being cooperative to the extent that they weren't actually being asked to do anything, whereas anti-Trump side, as they were approaching peacefully and calmly, and it's coming to the same intersection and trying to just have their voice heard at the same intersection, and the police are telling them, no, you have to. This is an unlawful assembly. You have to go back, disperse, and And in fact, the anti-Trump side did disperse at first, and they dispersed back a couple of blocks, and then they saw that nothing was happening to the pro-Trump side. They were being allowed to stay there. So the anti-Trump side then came back to the same intersection, and that's when it started to escalate, where they were questioning the police as to why they were being forced back. And then the police just very methodically over the next couple of hours just kept using force and pushing the anti-Trump side back, and actually causing sporadic conflicts and incidents that they could then use to justify the earlier declaration of unlawful assembly, which was actually based on nothing. So.
Right. Okay. So that makes sense. So they're being cooperative in the sense they weren't really applying any rules to that side and only applying rules to the counter protester side. One of the things that the city attorney admits is that there were Trump people coming through the alleyways, through the backside, and instigating fights. I mean, she's not denying that that's the case. So now what she's basically saying is that the reason that side was dispersed only isn't because it was the patriot side versus the counter protester side, but because that was the side where all the violence was occurring. Ergo, it wasn't politically motivated. What is your response to that?
Well, the police were definitely aware that the pro-Trump side was being allowed to cross the police lines and access the anti-Trump side of Mission Boulevard through the alleys, and was causing altercations and then going back. And the police, by the way, the police had confidential informants, undercover detectives in the crowd, embedded in the crowd, so they knew what was going on. They knew who was responsible. They didn't. Their MO for that day was not to arrest perpetrators of violence. They actually wanted there to be sporadic incidents of violence that they could use to justify declaring the unlawful assembly only on that one side. So the pro-Trump side was essentially protected by the police, and then the anti-Trump side, it was just a free-for-all where they let the pro-Trump people come in, cause altercations, and go back out, and then the police would just continue pushing that one side back further and further, and treating them very aggressively. So it's a completely differential treatment between the two sides based on the viewpoint of the two sides.
Indeed. And it to say that this isn't political seems ridiculous to me. Looking at the aerial footage was really kind of telling. Now, this was later on in the afternoon. I think the aerial footage started about 4:00. But because he's in the helicopter, right, the command, you can hear dispatch chiming in. You can hear various officers chiming in. So it gives you a really entire total picture of what was happening. So on more than one occasion, you heard officers call into command with various degrees of like, they're not cooperating. This is a problem. Are we going to continue to let them march? At one point, they started harassing people at the Shore Club, marching down the boardwalk. They weren't stopped then, although dispatch at that point did chime in saying, we're sending an arrest team down there. Nobody was arrested as far as I could tell. Why do you think that is? Because I felt like listening to command, when one of the officers said, should we stop them because they're now harassing civilians on the boardwalk? Novak basically comes back in and says, no, let them march I just need to know if there are counter protesters there that I need to get in between. So he was hyper focused on the counter protesters, or what the DA is calling, the Antifa group, versus the fact that there were civilians there that were also being harassed and troubled by what was happening. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, and that was actually a couple hours after the initial unlawful assembly declaration. So the initial unlawful assembly declaration occurred at about 2:30 p.m. That was only directed towards the anti-Trump side, but it was at the same intersection where the pro-Trump side was allowed to continue demonstrating. So as the anti-Trump side is pushed further and further back, and then just gradually, methodically over time, causing a few isolated incidents of a water bottle being thrown there, some kids coming in on skateboards and throwing eggs at another point. It's just the police they know what they're doing. They're provoking a series of sporadic incidents from elements of the crowd or people that could come in and out of the crowd because they see the way that the police are behaving, and then the police turn around and use that to justify the original dispersal of that side. But what happened was, when they finally did their final escalation phase and just started pepperballing everybody on the anti-Trump side and just really violently dispersing with nightsticks out and clubbing people and shoving people over, at the end, this is a couple hours later, where they finally did that with the anti-Trump side, the pro-Trump side is still there at the same intersection, and they're allowed to then do their march, which they wanted to go down onto the boardwalk, and that's when they actually went in and started confronting people, and they actually ran into the Shore Club and were harassing and threatening people in there, and just all kinds of crazy stuff. They're going around just threatening bystanders, getting in altercations. The police are saying on the aerial footage that, or on the radio traffic, which you can hear on the aerial footage, that it's been hijacked by Proud Boys. They're not going along with the program, stuff like that. But the attitude of the police throughout was that the pro-Trump side was there to do their march, and they were going to be allowed to do their march, and the police were they were there to basically stop anyone who wanted to prevent the pro-Trump side from holding their march. And that seemed to have been their whole attitude from the beginning, that there was one side that was there to do this planned march, and they were going to be allowed to do that no matter how they behaved, and anybody that tried to have a different message or that might conflict with that needed to be dispersed out of there. So,
Bryan, my understanding as well is that there was no permit for the Trump march that day, and this was 3 days after January 6th, the Capitol insurrection. This was one of the Stop the Steal affiliated marches. Yeah,
I haven't seen any evidence of a permit. Of course, a permit isn't necessary to have a demonstration just on a public street or public sidewalk. And oftentimes, if there is a spontaneous demonstration where protesters are taking over part of a street or a sidewalk or something, rather than just disperse everybody or arrest everybody, the police will often just let them have their march, facilitate actually provide safety, like an escort, and just let the protesters have a certain march around a certain area. So it seemed like that was their plan with the pro-Trump side, that they were going to allow them to have this march. There didn't necessarily need to be a permit or anything like that. But this was 3 days after the Capitol insurrection. There were insurrectionists present in the pro-Trump side, and there were also well-known Nazis and people from Defend East County and some of these hate groups that were out there. Proud Boys, of course. A lot of them are going to jail now from the insurrection. So it was very dangerous elements that the police were welcoming into Pacific Beach to harass, threaten, and physically attack local residents, not just counter protesters, but people that lived there and people that were just there in the community. And so it was a really disturbing scene for a lot of people that witnessed, especially 3 days after the Capitol insurrection.
Indeed. In fact, some of the footage I've acquired that day did show a guy doing a Sig Heil, walking through a bystander just filmed this on his phone. He was doing a Sig Heil, a Nazi salute, stiff arm salute, walking through, the crowd. The Shore Club, you're right. You can see this in the aerial footage where they're jumping over the barricade onto the patio to instigate fights with people that were there having their lunch. Mm-hmm. They weren't part of counter protesters. So it obviously exceeded that. But my thing is this, there's the First Amendment right to protest, which I think is very important, something we should cherish. But when you start doing things like this, have you not crossed out of your First Amendment protected free speech? And if you think that is the case with the counter protesters, that they had done that, why not apply that unilaterally to both groups? It's just bizarre to me that when they called an unlawful assembly, they didn't make everybody leave.
Yeah, that's what the unlawful assembly statute is for. It's if a crowd dynamic is so uncontrollable and there's either imminent violence occurring or an imminent threat of violence, that's when you declare an unlawful assembly, which allows the police to then not only arrest violent actors or lawbreakers themselves, but also to arrest bystanders who refuse to leave. That's the whole point. So if you're not actually dispersing everyone in that area, then you're selectively enforcing the unlawful assembly statutes, and it's not a true unlawful assembly. It's really just a selective enforcement tool that they're using to disperse and arrest bystanders that they admit were not engaged in any kind of criminal activity or violent activity. But because they made this announcement, they believe that gives them the right to then just selectively disperse folks whose message they don't like.
Okay, so there you have that. So let me ask you this. A motion to have DA Summer Stephan disqualified from trying this case has now been filed by one of the defendant's attorneys. A lot of what is in his motion is stemming from some of the things that you found out in your case. And to that, the attorney has added, the fact that there are members of the American Guard there, the fact that Summer Stephan had taken donations from the GOP leader in San Diego who has a literal Hitler video out there in the public. defend East County members. So a lot of hate group folks were there. And two of the named victims in her case are actually American Guardsmen that have been involved in violence elsewhere. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I did have a chance to kind of skim the motion to disqualify the district attorney. It's pretty long. I haven't read the whole thing, but I did see that some of the screenshots and things that I pulled from analyzing the hours and hours of body cam footage were in there. So that, yeah, I mean, that shows kind of the chronology of what happened that day. And then my understanding is that the criminal defense attorney used other information about, like you said, the campaign donations and things like that to show bias of the district attorney. But it's clear from what occurred that day that there was definite bias occurring from the enforcement standpoint.
Okay, so that was Bryan Pease I was just talking with. He is also an attorney. He's the one bringing the litigation against the city for basically only dispersing the counter protesters that day and allowing the Trump folks to run wild, so to speak. I do want to bring up two things. So on November 17th, which is next Friday, Curtis Briggs will be arguing his case before the judge about the motion to have her disqualified, to have Summer Stephan disqualified. In the meantime, I want to pull up her response was filed this morning, and also a brief was included from Rob Bonta, who is the Attorney General for the state of California. Let's pull up the Summer Stephan one, just so people can see that she did file a response. In the response, she's basically including various cases that she has brought to in the county against people who have committed hate crimes, which is true. She has done that. But what I think is more salient is she hasn't addressed any of the underlying problems as to why she's being, why this motion was filed in the first place, meaning she doesn't address why none of the Trump people on Pacific Beach January 9th protests, why none of them were charged with anything, and given especially that many of them committed assaults far more vicious than what these Antifa members committed. She doesn't address that at all. And she doesn't address the money, the dark money that she's taken from some of these folks. She doesn't address that the individuals named that were also there present that day at Pacific Beach have been involved with assaults in the past that she has not prosecuted at all. So basically, she's just saying, here I have, prosecuted a few handful of hate crimes. Look, I'm not biased. I think it's very weak. I think it's a weak response. Let's pull up the Rob Bonta one. This to me is not a shock in the sense that you're not very often going to see an attorney general go against any sitting DA in any of the districts. That's just not something they're going to do. Generally, an attorney general is going to say, no, we can't go around qualifying our DAs. So very kind of not very anything really interesting he had to say here. I did want to say on page 5, he kind of talks about how he says that, that Curtis Briggs hasn't entirely established that all of these things are factual. It's just more opinion. I don't think that's true. Based on that, I'm wondering if Rob Bonta or his staff actually looked at any of the underlying evidence. It seems like they didn't. This seems just like a kind of cut and paste 1 hour long job we're going to do because we have to do. Anyway, so we will be paying attention to that. I want to make sure that everybody tunes into part 2. Part 2 of this special report, we're going to actually talk to some of the protesters that were there on the ground that day. And I'm going to get into a little bit more about who these individuals are that are, members of hate groups that are also named as both victims and witnesses in this case. So thank you for joining me today. It is Friday, so have a great evening and a great weekend and spend some time with your family and loved ones. And we will see you on Status Coup next week.